Jeffrey Shaw is a business mentor. He's an author. He's a TEDx speaker, and he's an all around amazing human being. He joins us today on Equal Matters. Jeffrey Shaw, I'm so excited to have you because we have so much to get into today. I love this fact about you, and this is where I just want to start with you, other than saying
Uh-oh.
hi and thank you, is you've never received a paycheck from a
Nope.
corporation in your life. How
Nope.
did you pull that off, never
I
actually going to work for the man?
I didn't even know that was unusual, honestly, until a few years ago, I was at a dinner party in Toronto and it came up in conversation and everybody else on the table was so shocked. They're like, "What? How is it you've never had a job?" People were saying, like, "Do you talk about that from on stage?" I'm like, "Is that unusual?" Like I didn't actually it didn't I just never, I think a lot of times we look back on our lives, we don't think it's all that interesting. So, we just live our lives. So I didn't even know it was odd. I'll tell you, Rob, for me, I don't know that I actually look at it as the root as to why I'm, now an advocate and coach for self-employed business owners, because I don't know that I felt like I had another choice. I grew up in a lower middle class community, lower middle class family. I had two older brothers. My oldest brother, like, he did finish high school, went right into like the construction business, moved out to Colorado. My other brother didn't even finish high school. And I grew up in a school where, like, we had guidance counselors, but I don't know what they did.
Mm,
There was no conversation. I didn't know higher education was an option. The Thankfully, the one thing I had was a talent as a photographer, and I decided maybe I can make something of that as a career. So I went away to photography school, which was a 1 year program, actually intending to be an architect photographer because I thought Mike Brady was really cool. Like, he looked at me like he had the ultimate job, working at home, family around him. Um,
not working for the man.
Not working for the Mets. I went off to photography school thinking I was going to be an architect photographer and fell in love with photographing people and kind of shifted my ideas. It just never occurred to me to get a job. And honestly, up to that point in my life, I had considered myself very shy, a geek, all the things we do to criticize ourselves. I just figured I was unemployable. Like, I had such low self-esteem. I'm like, who would hire this geek? Who would hire this guy? I just figured I had to find my own way. And with limited options, I was just like, all right, let me just take the bull by the horns and figure this thing out. Become a photographer. I didn't know what it meant, how I would turn that into a career, but I figured it out as I went, and I think figured it out pretty damn well.
I would
But
agree. So, and
never had a job.
yeah, oh yeah, that never had a job, but you've had a job just working for yourself.
Yeah,
Photography, you coach people like me
yeah.
as we jump into our self-employed life because it is very different. So, is there a moment, Jeffrey, where you look at and you knew you took a bold move that really solidified your path to the self-employed life?
Gosh. Wow. So many moments. That that's a great question. Like I said, there are actually a lot of pivotal moments that I can very clearly recall now. This is the one of the advantages of aging, at whatever age one chooses to take this position, is that you have more retrospect. You look
Yeah.
back. My photographs were on the Oprah show. I don't even remember the year, and I think 2007.
Wow.
And um, I think it was 2007. I'm looking off to the side because it's hanging on the wall. But
Yeah, I think you should. If you have a picture that makes it to the
well,
Oprah show, you should be
here's
like
the thing,
all
and
over the
and they flew me out there, and I took my mother. I convinced them to give me an extra flight, an extra day. So I took my mother because I figured that's a score.
amazing.
So I took my mother, and I got to meet Oprah. I was on, we were there for the filming, and it was just a great experience. And I'm not kidding you. It's only about a month ago I actually framed it in the magazine, and when I shared it with my daughter who works with me, she said, "How is it I've never seen this before?" And we're talking like 17 years ago. I had this incredible experience. But you know what? I think we just do these moments. So, in answer to your question, was there a single pivotal moment? I don't know, but I'll tell you, there was a pivotal conversation with my father that I now look back and realize it set the course of a lot of my decisions in life. I didn't honestly have a great relationship with my father. I remember I had a therapist once ask me to recall conversations with him, and I can only recall two.
Mm,
Like, he just was a man of he spoke to everybody else, but he just I don't know, it just he and I didn't have much of a relationship, so we certainly didn't have conversations. And he passed suddenly when I was 20, so
Oh,
it
wow.
was not a very long relationship in the
Mhm.
grand scheme of things. But this one conversation, I probably was around 14 from what I can figure. He and I went out for breakfast, which was extremely rare, and I was having bacon and eggs sitting at the counter. It was like this typical American breakfast place, like I don't know, Denny's or something. And I was having eggs and bacon, and I went to cut my bacon, and when bacon's crispy, it flew off the plate. It like went flying in some embarrassingly way, like down the counter. And sorry about that.
Live, baby. Just things
Wow.
happen. You're a man of
And
demand.
that wasn't on before we got on the phone. I don't know what broke that. Hopefully, it's not one of my favorites calling with an emergency. Something broke the do not disturb. Um, but so the bacon went flying, and I was embarrassed. I was expecting to get yelled at. And he actually turned out to be kind of understanding. And that led into a conversation we rarely had. And he said to me, which was this pivotal moment, he said, "Nobody's going to care about your life as much as you do."
Mm,
And honestly, I kind of took that from him as that including him,
100%. How
right?
could you
I
not?
mean, I just felt like, okay, I guess this includes him. Like he just I don't know if he didn't care in a way it was, but I look back and like it was a good setup for the rest of my life. It really was. It was pivotal for me because I think that had a lot to do with, like I said earlier, just choosing to take life by the horns and just saying, "This is up to me. Nobody's showing up to save me here, including my parents. So I better figure this out." Um, not that they wouldn't have, and I was very close to my mother, but it was just a moment when you realize this thing called life is up to us. And if you maintain a good attitude, in other words, one not of entitlement, like things are not going to just show up in your lap, nor should they. You gotta I raised my kids with a simple premise that they had to meet the sun halfway.
Mm,
I knew I was raising kids in an environment that was going to be very fortunate for them, but I didn't want them to be spoiled. I didn't want them to be lazy. So I always taught them it's like, hey, you have to meet life halfway. Like undoubtedly, they knew the sun was shining on their lives. They knew they were grateful. They knew they were blessed, but I didn't want them to be lazy. So you got to put the effort in to meet the sun halfway. So I think that was a really pivotal conversation with my father that set across my direction in life as well as my own attitudes as a parent.
well, it's just really interesting too when you think about, Jeffrey, the fact that you remember only a couple of conversations
Mhm.
and that being one of them, because I just started to shift the way I think a little bit because when I was 14, 2 different people told me I had a radio voice, and at that point,
Mhm.
I would not considering careers, I wasn't thinking about the future, I was being a freshman in high school, but my voice had changed, and the fact that 2 random people told me that
Mhm.
got me interested. So it's sometimes that random thing that maybe in your case, it's your dad. For me, it's random people kind of give you a light or almost permission to live the life that you want. And
Yeah.
for me, that little 2 little things allowed me to find that thing that I really wanted to do and do it. Now, of course, now I just left that so I can hang out with you and, do my own self-employed life here.
Well, but you
Just
still
live
have a
here.
voice for radio, so
That's true. That is true. But I think to go back to those in this book, you have it you have it on lit too, or if someone only has like
mhm.
half an hour, they can go through it. You mentioned eggs at Denny's sitting down with your dad, but you
Mhm.
mentioned how you really started selling eggs
Yeah.
in your neighborhood. So, how did that give you the confidence to be able to build your own self-employed life?
Yeah, I tell you, looking back, again, I love the advantage of retrospect. I think selling eggs door to door was kind of brilliant, right? Especially, it goes. I tell you, to this day, I think fundamentally all my business lessons come from that experience of selling eggs. Because first of all, it's supply and demand, right? I grew up in
Mhm.
the country, so one thing there were plenty of were farms that sold eggs or had eggs. So I had this idea that I struck a deal with a local farmer that I would go to his farm on Thursdays specifically, and fill up the cardboard cartons. He supplied the cartons. I bought a dozen eggs plus the cardboard carton for 25 cents. Look, right. And I sold the eggs for $1.25. I even went back and I searched on the internet for as accurate as we know the internet is. But
Especially now.
this was 1978 when I was 14 years old. And apparently the average price for a dozen eggs in 1978, if the internet is to be believed, was 78 cents.
Hmm,
So I was selling these eggs way beyond fair market value. But you know what? I was selling farm fresh eggs long before it was a thing. Right. So
yes.
um, I thought it was kind of a brilliant business concept, and I said to me, it just made it easy. If my cost was what 25 cents, I charged a $1.25. So I just knew I was making $1 a dozen, and so that's how it came about. And I also leveraged the opportunity that my mother owned a beauty parlor in town, which was like bunch of old ladies sit around and gossiping, but
Mhm.
they love buying eggs for Sunday morning breakfast. Plus, I'm the owner, the salon owner's son, so there was all this pity and all that stuff. So I sold tons of dozens of eggs at my mother's shop every Saturday. I had a thriving little business going. Now, mind you, I'm 14 years old, and I used to borrow my mother's Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, which is just this massive boat of a car, and I would drive like around town at 14 years old. I was well below driving age, but it's the country. Like nobody cares. If you can try farm equipment on the road, who cares about a 14-year-old? The problem was I could just barely see over the steering wheel and reach the gas pedal at the same time. I think I actually sat on like blocks of wood.
Yeah, phone book or something.
Yeah, exactly. But even still, because that barely reached the steering wheel, the gas pedals, but I pulled it off. And, but here's the thing, Rob, it scared the living crap out of me. Like everything about it scared me. I mean, I truly was a very, very shy kid. And I would be in a panic attack, like with every door that I knocked on. Um, but I realized at some point, which was probably one of my favorite things to write in this book, because as I was writing the book, I really became aware of this, that we will do anything in life if the benefit is greater than the fear,
Mm,
right? I mean, I was scared to death, and there's still to this day plenty of things in business that scare me, but the benefits, right? What is and it's tapping into the benefit. And at 14 years old, the benefit really wasn't the money, although the money turned out to be pretty good from it. What I got hooked on as a benefit was how I was growing as a person. I
mm,
saw myself becoming less afraid. I saw myself building relationships with people where suddenly I kind of liked knocking on their door because I knew the person on the other side was friendly. So I learned the advantage of the benefit of building relationships. Um, I started my marketing head, even at 14 years old, was being tripped out. Like I just thought it was so fun. And one of the stories I tell in the book was how I used to clean off all the chicken poop, right? Because that seemed like the right thing to do. But then I started playing with it and thinking, well, what if I left a little bit of the chicken poop on there? Like, could that evoke the emotion to my customers that wow, these are really farm fresh? So I love the power I was finding, and that to me, marketing is power. And but if you do it right and you do it in integrity, marketing has a lot to do with empathy. If
mm.
you know your people, the people you serve so well, like I came to know my customers, I knew that they wanted to feel like these were farm fresh. I had one woman, I was really her dealer because she had moved out of New York City. We were living a couple hours north of New York City. She was taking him into New York City and I think marking them up even more because she was buying dozens and dozens. And I know she went into the weekend and maybe she was generous and she was giving them out to her Italian family members, but I think she was selling them, reselling them. I really do. And I knew, she wanted to feel like these were farm fresh. She could then go into New York City, chicken poop and all on the
Ooh,
eggs, and like, look how fresh these eggs are. And I realized that not only was it power, that there was a great deal of empathy and understanding the people you serve so well that you're willing to do what needs to be done and say what needs to be said to help people feel what they want to feel.
mm,
Right? This really wasn't about me selling eggs and selling them as more fresh. It became this is what she wants to feel. My customers want to feel like these are farm fresh. So if I left just a little bit of chicken poop on there, I would help them feel what they want to feel. And that became the basis of to this day how I think about business in a proactive way. Like I decide, this is how I help my coaching clients lay out their websites. Everything I do is I pre-decide what I want people to say in their heads, and then say what needs to be said or do what needs to be done to get people to say what I want them to say in their heads. I was speaking at an event recently, and I was teaching this as a marketing strategy about predetermining what you want people to say in their heads and then saying what needs to be said, doing what needs to be done to get them to say that. So when I was done with my talk, there was an open Q&A, and somebody said to me, "Did you predetermine what you wanted us to say in our heads about your talk today?" And I said, "Yes, I did. In fact, it's written as a note on my first slide, my title slide." And then the guy asking the question said, "Well, did we say it?" And I said, "Well, let me ask all of you, give me some feedback. What did you think of my talk today?" And a woman at another table raised her hand and she said, "Honestly, your talk today was about way more than sales."
Mm.
And I turned my computer around, and exactly those words were, "This was about way more than sales."
Like a magician.
I mean, it was such an incredible moment in that moment for people to see exactly what I had just taught them. Like, I knew I wanted my audience to walk away feeling like, okay, I got a lot of sales techniques about how to sell to the rich, how to sell
Mhm.
to the luxury market. I gave them that, but my talk is so inspiring, and it's calling them to greatness. And that's intentional, which is why I felt confident I would evoke the feeling like, God, this was way more than a sales talk. Like, I actually feel like I can do this. I
Mm.
feel like I'm inspired. And I got exactly the response I wanted. So those selling eggs, like I said, to this day, it was the foundation of so many important business lessons for me.
I love that, and I wanna get back to the photography in just a second, but I wanna throw something at you
Mm.
just to because I love you as a human being, I love you as a friend, and I love you as a coach and mentor. So you've been coaching me because I walked away from radio to help people become better communicators, to get to the message across quicker and clearer because we live in this world now where it's information overload. So if you're willing to
Mhm.
share how you've been coaching me so people can get a sense of how you coach. So I've had major challenges just trying something new, right? It's like I'm going back to 14-year-old Jeff knocking on doors, freaking out because it's hard to ask people to work with you.
Mhm.
So, what are some of the strategies you use to coach me and others like me so that we leave a little chicken poop on the egg?
Yeah. So I'm actually literally recalling some of the conversations we've had. What and I've been coaching for 16 years, and I will tell you, it's we develop, not just as coach, and any of us in whatever area of expertise we choose to step into. And what has developed for me the most is trusting my instincts.
Hmm.
Right. I became pretty aware, not right in the beginning of being a coach, but at some point I realized how much what I refer to now as my photographer's brain works for me. By nature of being a photographer, we see what other people don't see, right? I mean, that's been my whole life where I'm taking a walk and other people are just like going through life. I see everything. And I tend to see things in pieces. I thrive in a certain amount of chaos. As a photographer, I photographed entirely on location. And that was a decision I made because my original love was architecture. So I didn't want to be stuck in a studio. I'm not an in office kind of guy. So I chose to be a photographer that would always photograph on location, which is an out of control situation. It's out of control circumstances. Many times on the beach, gorgeous homes, but you've got wind, you got sunlight, you've got behavior of humans. Like nothing about it is controlled. And I thrive in that because I see how the pieces can come together and create harmony. And that has everything to do with it. It's what it's like to coach somebody. People are particularly innovative, business owners, entrepreneurs. They're innately a bit chaotic, right? I know I've got the perfect client when somebody comes to me and says, "Oh, I'm a hot mess." I'm like, "I love the hot mess. Like,
I think
bring it
that was a
on."
quote from me. I'm a hot mess.
Yeah. I mean, you probably said it. I mean, so many people do. It's like they describe they're all over the place. I'm like, that's the perfect environment for me. It's just like being a photographer. So what I've learned is I definitely I have confidence in my ability to see what people can't see in themselves. I have confidence in my ability to give them comfort in the chaos that of the world to them, and giving them direction. I refer to my coaching style as pointing. I'm not a passive coach. I will point people in the direction that I instinctively feel is a hit, whether it's their brand message or whether it's a strategy. And then I say, now, on your own as well as with my support, let's prove it to be true or not.
Mhm.
It's it's almost always true. I've got really good instincts, but I point. I said I don't sit there and watch people struggle to find their way. But what has developed the most for me in the more recent years, I described it a second ago as trust in my instinct, but it's something different that I haven't quite even developed the words for. I refer to it as dropping in, which doesn't really mean anything to anybody. It's just a visceral feeling.
Mm.
So I've learned to it's instincts on steroids in a way that when I'm coaching you, when I'm coaching anybody, there's a moment where when something is real, when it presents itself as something truthful, I can physically feel my body drop into it. And then I will be brave enough to say it. I don't let my own internal doubts creep in. Well, that might be a crazy thing to say, or what. I can feel the dropping in, and then I've learned to go with it. So that's developed. Like I said, that's a level of maturity, I think, as a coach that I've never quite experienced in the same way with anybody I've hired as a coach, but have really learned to trust in it in myself, and trust in actually feeling it. So,
I wrote a pitch that you looked at, Jeffrey, and it was long. And you were
mhm.
like, "Remember the whole point of your pitch?
Yeah,
Get your message across quicker and clearer. Let's do that."
yeah,
That's a perfect
yeah,
example of being willing to say that,
yeah.
because it's like, okay, that's good creative process, Rob, that you have done in your radio background. This is great, but let's make this like 3 sentences instead of 30.
Yeah, yeah, and I love stuff like that. Really do. I love watching people's growth for one, but I also love when human behavior behaves in a way that it's so ironic you want to hit yourself in the head. Like, I mean, but that is so indicative. Like, and I have these certain, and again, I call them souls gatekeepers. I like to give things a name so I can grasp it. And there's this way, and you're part of my high achievers mastermind. And the reason I call it high achievers is not that it's a statement as to the level of success anybody has had in the group, but rather, when you're a high achiever, all sorts of stuff comes up. It just does. There's increased imposter syndrome, there's increased insecurity, there's increased pressure. Um, I know the most successful years of my career, it was like a hot potato. And that's how it felt to me. It's like I felt like I was now holding something, the responsibility, the employees, the expense, the lifestyle I had built. The whole thing just felt like a freaking hot potato to me that I was really uncomfortable with. And, when I was a starving 20-year-old, I didn't have that feeling. It's all joy. But suddenly you hit massive success when you think that that's what you've been striving for, and you're left holding a freaking hot potato.
Mm.
Right? So, literally, unfortunately, I developed a habit of just like spending it all away because it was uncomfortable with it. So, the biggest house and dropping, ridiculous amounts of money on anything and everything. So it felt like a hot potato to me.
That's
So,
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, so I love watching the ironies of human behavior as
Mm.
well, and see how it's indicative of something big. And that's why I call it souls gatekeepers. Man, it's crazy when things show up. So when somebody like you shows up and you actually just contradicted the very same thing you're teaching other people, I love that. I'm like, that's an indicator of a souls gatekeeper showing up. You are on the brink of your most purposeful work because a soul's gatekeeper is showing up. The irony of that is so ridiculous. It has to be from more than just by chance, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, hey, at the core, I'm a photographer, and I love human behavior, and this is just another observation of human behavior.
So let's go back to you being 20, Jeffrey. You've got your photography school is done, and now you're going to
Mhm.
go venture into the world of photography. How did you make the switch from wanting to do architecture to people?
Yeah. That actually happened within the photography program. They actually intelligently, they really we got exposed to a lot of different things. Pet photography, even aerial photography. We even had to do public speaking as part of the training. So we had a chance to explore a broad range, and at some point, we had to decide what the focus of our portfolio was going to be.
Mm,
And again, I was originally in it for architecture, and while I was photographing what was intended to be my architecture portfolio, I started including photograph people sitting on the furniture in the room, and I just fell in love with the humanness of it all. I fell in love with the transaction, but it also developed a style that wasn't common at this time. We're talking 19 in the 80s. So people weren't photographing on location as much. That was a pretty relatively new concept. Um, and so it developed a style that was kind of unique in that it was people in an environment, but the environment told the story. Um, Sometimes there was a great deal of environment, but then I also just then it was about a study of the person, but it's all architecture. I don't care how close up you are on someone. There's an architecture to their face. There's an architecture to the gesture. I love hand gestures, like just things that people the way people lean. Um, I often, when I'm photographing people, I'm always studying the time in between. It's one of the things I kind of disliked when the industry went digital, is the changing of the film took time. And I used a medium format camera, so I would only get 10 to 20 shots per roll. So every 10 to 20 shots, you're changing your roll of film. And sometimes I would have an assistant, but I would often use that time to stall because while I'm changing the film, I'm actually watching how somebody has just changed their body position. And then I'll point, it's like, keep that. That's you. Right. So it was the in between, which are also some of my favorite moments. I mean, I love when I'm photographing a family, um, particularly the families I photograph, very, very affluent families. They're busy people. They don't always get to connect together as much as they would like. And I mean, I love that in between moments in photographs when a husband reaches over and like pinches his wife's butt. Um, I love seeing stuff like that. And somehow people forget that I can still see when I'm looking through the camera lens. Like they can't see me anymore because I'm behind the block of the camera, but I can still see through the lens. Somehow people forget that. So I'd see the most delicate, loving things between spouses, between parents and their kids. Um, and sometimes I would call it out again. It's not that I would want that particular thing for a photograph, but it told me a lot about the relationship that was going on and the way people and a loving family kind of jab at each other in fun ways. And it let me know, like, who should I put together? So the in between
yeah.
moments of life.
Well, that's that magic, right?
Yeah.
Capturing the realness, because
Yeah.
I've always found that those are the best photographs, is
Always.
the one where you're almost not as the, subject, you're not paying attention to the camera, you're just
Yeah.
being.
Yeah, and yet my style was and that's what I loved about the way I photographed, honestly, like, my subjects in the end ended up looking at the camera, because that's what sells, particularly in these beautiful homes, I'm selling works of art.
Mm.
People don't my clients would buy a small 5 by 7 of the kids playing on the beach wistfully, right? But that's not what I was out to sell. I was selling really large portraits, and, I just had a certain style where, like, one of my I can think of a few occasions where this worked, where, I'm photographing a family together, but then it's just the way a child, and usually I would notice it the in between photographs, like suddenly a daughter just like rests her head on mom's shoulder. Like that's the moment, right? It's so they're still looking at the camera, but that gesture is just so beautiful because that's how that child feels about their mother. I was at the beach yesterday, and again, I'm just a professional human observer, but I was at the beach yesterday and there was this mom, a very pregnant mom, a dad, and their probably 2-year-old daughter. And it just was so sweet to watch every time they got up to walk to the water, to make sandcastles. The father and daughter were in each other's space. And all that father had to do is reach his hand out, and that daughter, without looking, instinctively knew to reach up her hand and grab her father's hand. And it's just no words needed to be said. She didn't have to look. She could feel when her father's hand was outreached for her to grab as they walked towards the water. And it just, I was so moved by that yesterday because I know that to be true. That was the experience I had with my own kids. Like they don't even know it, but that brought back really incredible memories for me. How often I just would extend my hand and any one of my kids would feel that vibe and know to grab on. Right. So it's just, that's observing things like that affect how I would photograph over all the years.
Well, it's like the essence of human connection, and in the self-employed life, and in your first book, Lingo, is that a common theme, especially explaining what you do with photography and observing people? Because I think as small business owners, as individuals trying to make an impact for other individuals or groups, that top level, because I know you love luxury,
Mhm.
and because there's a lot different about it because it's like the details matter. But I think behind all of that is a human connection, which in a
Mhm.
technological age can be harder to achieve. So is that
Or
something?
easier.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, maybe it is, and maybe that's it because not as many people are doing it. Or if you just focus
Yeah.
and be with someone for 20 minutes, it can change someone's day, week, month.
Yeah, and it's something. No, you're absolutely. I would say the common thread in everything I've ever done, whether and I just look at the transitions in my life, going from, photographer to coach to now specializing in the luxury market, particularly on this as a speaker. That the common thread, it is connection, but it's even beyond that. It's care for the other, right? To me, to be the best photographer that I was capable of being, it was because I chose to study human behavior, like this mom is dad and daughter at the beach. It's because I really cared deeply about people getting the resemblance of their family that they wanted. As a coach, you're a client, you know how much I care. It's like I want your success. I feel it. Like, and that's one thing with being a coach is that you have to take care of yourself in a certain way because it is potentially draining because I feel everybody else's experience, the good times, the bad times. Um, and then, in the luxury space, I think part of the appeal there for me is that they're a harder audience to understand. It's just innately in dealing in the luxury space, you have to give there are some correlations. I mean, not every luxury buyer is perfect or pleasant. Um, Although, like I said, I'm always very quick to say, I mean, I served that audience as the photographer for 40 years, and I can think of 2 instances that were
Mm,
unpleasant. Other than that, and I think 2 instances over 40 years says a lot. But
yeah.
they're what I love about the luxury market and what I love about now helping other people understand how they tick is that they're intense. There's an intensity. For one, I mean, I said, no matter I've come to refer to it as the ordinary world and the luxury market world because everything in the ordinary world is accelerated, right? So we might in the ordinary world be on, we're aware of scam, right? But imagine being affluent and you're that much more of a target. You're suspicious of everybody. So what that means to businesses is that I refer to it as clean energy. Like your energy has to be 10 times more clear if you're going to serve the luxury market. Like if you have any inkling in you that you are serving this clientele because you're in it for the money, they will smell that a million miles away and you won't get anywhere. Right. I refer to it in my talks as the it factor. Like
Mm.
you have to figure out within yourself what to you is greater than the money and putting up with the demands. Like there has to be something in you that is of such clean integrity that that's why you show up as you do to serve this clientele because they are more perceptive than everybody else. They are always the trendsetters. They're ahead of the game because they're sometimes just flat out informed ahead of the rest of us, if you will. Um, so therefore, you know, they're going to be because they're trendsetters and early adopters. The downside of that is they're also a little bit more of an emotional roller coaster, right? Because they're ahead of most of us in knowing when the economy is tanking. Like they've And as a business owner, I came to start seeing the signs. Like there were just very
Mm.
obvious things that you could get wind of, that things are going to shift in the economy because the affluent market, which is kind of leading the way, is responding to certain sensitivities. So they're an intense psychology. And I love that. And that's why, so without a doubt, the common denominator, it may feel like connection, but I would even say it's more the common denominator in anything I've ever done in my life has been caring more about the other person. Not
Which
necessarily
yeah,
more than yourself, but caring
yeah.
deeply about the people you're serving.
Which is something that requires clarity on your part that you touched on. And you have
Mhm,
a TEDx talk as well, in which you talk about we all have proverbial closets to come out of.
mhm.
And I think that that would be a requirement, having watched your speech, and you can find it in the show notes on this podcast because I'd encourage you to watch it. In order to step into yourself fully, you have to understand what closets you're in.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and that's why that's the opening line, and I meant it literally. I mean, it ends up I bring up humor later on to the literal closet that I came out of.
We'll
But
talk
I
about it in a
actually
minute.
yeah, I actually don't want that necessarily to be front and center. Like, when I walk out on the stage and just say, "We all have closets to come out of." We do. We all have ways in which we're holding a part of ourselves back. We all have there's all of us have something bigger outside of the room or closet that we're currently in that we need to step into, whether it's something bigger, bolder, a little scarier. It's an iterative process. We're constantly stepping out of the closet just a little bit. um, and that's why I started it with that line, and I truly believe it. And I feel like, and a lot of times as a coach, I'm coercing people out of their current closet to show up bigger.
Well, it's a safe space, right? Your closet, you know where your clothes are, you know where
Yeah.
your shoes are. You just like to hang out in there. Not obviously literally, but
Yep.
metaphorically speaking, it is a safe
100%.
zone. So
Yep.
anytime you try something new, you have to expand and step out of whatever closet that you were in. So for me, it was the radio closet. I could have
Yeah.
stayed in the radio closet for the next 20 years, made some money,
Absolutely.
retired at 65, and been like, this was great. But
Yeah.
I knew I wanted to expand my capacity and make a bigger impact
Yep.
on the world than I was doing that. So for me to step out, and still, it's like I put one foot out. I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'll just go back in for a little while because it's nice and comfy in here.
Yeah.
So how do you encourage people, especially, given your journey of selling eggs, leaving the poop on them, going into photography, having a very specific market that you did really forever, but then you start coaching. Now
Mhm.
you're adding new things to your repertoire as well. And you can find all the stuff at jeffreyshaw.com, by the way.
Mhm.
So how do you encourage people to take those steps to fully step into themselves?
Mhm. So, for one, I do think it's an iterative process. You have to let people know that you're there to support them. I think we should expand our comfort zones. I don't think we should leap out of our comfort zones.
Mm.
Okay, so I look at it more as an expansion. So I'm just trying to get people to expand the zone in which they're comfortable in, so that they're not leaving anything behind, that may put their life at risk. Because I work with people that I like to say are of a certain age. You're on the younger side, probably, but we're not 20-year-olds. Nobody I coach is, everybody has a life in motion, right? They've got mortgages and rent, and they've got partners and responsibilities and families, perhaps. And so people have life in motion. That's who I coach. So I'm not, we don't want to put that at risk. We don't want to be irresponsible here. Like, this highly pumped up, like, get out of your comfort zone. It's like, no, just expand it. Find in yourself more areas that you're comfortable. The interesting thing to me, probably one of the most common things that is said to me by audiences and clients, is that in whatever way I have shown up to them, they will thank me for giving them permission. And that has always struck me really interesting, how often I hear that. People say, thank you for giving me permission. And for the longest time, I didn't know what I was giving them permission for, because I'm looking at it thinking, you're your own person here. Like, why, I don't know you well enough, especially if it's an audience member. It's like, I don't know you well enough for you to be thanking me for permission. I didn't say that you could go out Saturday night. Like, what did I? But I realized what they were thanking me permission for is, I think a lot of people walking around innately with their next level within them. They innately know they're called to something bigger. They innately know that there's a way they want to be in business. They innately feel some of the strategies that they may have heard from me, but they haven't taken action on these things. They haven't expanded out of the closet. So ultimately, I think a lot of it is just granting people permission to actually step into that.
Yeah,
So I feel like my way of getting people to expand their comfort zone is coercing, just, and also just laying down a lot of truths. That's why I do talk about the soul's gatekeepers, right? I want people to, that's just the truth. It's inevitable. The bigger the thing you're stepping into, I mean, people that lay on their couch for a living have an advantage, right? They're not going to face this stuff. But if you are of a high achieving mindset, there's things you're going to face. And I think just by bringing those truths forward is really important. It's also why I'm very transparent about good times, bad times that I've had, because the more we can speak truth into this situation, the more people can find more comfort in an expanded comfort zone. And it's just a lot of coercing in a gentle way to get people to expand their comfort zone.
one of the stories you told us when we had our mastermind retreat was walking into a country club as a young man to really pitch that photography business. And that to me seemed like going back to the eggs, a bold move, but talking about expanding your comfort zone, right? You do it little by little, and then all of a sudden you can take a big leap. So is that story in relating it, right? I want to bring up your first book here, Lingo, because there is a connectedness in language too of learning how to communicate effectively to who you're speaking to. So is that part of this growth too, is understanding how someone else speaks so you can adapt to that language and make sure you're on the same page.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think at the core of everything I've ever done is this idea of really caring about other people, right? So
Mm,
I think that has everything to do with speaking their lingo. It's an incredibly empathetic and compassionate thing to do, to actually be willing to understand people so well that you understand their secret language, right? That you're meeting them where they are, not at the compromising of, speaking a language that you're incredibly uncomfortable with, but just having the empathy and compassion to want to understand what makes other people tick, I think is really important. And um, I don't know. For me, that is a comfort zone for me. I really enjoy that process, and I guess it isn't for others. But whether you're comfortable with it or not, like the country club story you're referring to, it's going to require times in your life when, in order to fully understand people, you're going to have to put yourself where you might not be comfortable. And I think our society has been facing a lot of that lately. Whether it's Black Lives Matters or the Me Too movement, it's a willingness to step into worlds that you may not currently understand fully, and and even more importantly, have a willingness to get the feedback that you need to understand, how other people see things. And how they feel. So I think it's just a lot of willingness
mhm.
that's required in order to really care about others, to really step into the empathy and compassion that's required to kind of get on the same page and speak one another's lingo.
And Jeffrey, what I love about what you just said there, and that's part of what I teach it in my communication program, is just that it's figuring out how to take yourself out of the equation and your feelings and your opinions, because a lot of times those opinions are from somewhere else. They're not
Hmm.
necessarily from you. It's something you picked up along the way and you just assumed to be true. So, for example, you came out at 44 years old.
Hmm.
And I bring that up because it's very interesting because there seems to be, and part of the reason this podcast exists, Jeffrey, called Equal Matters, is just that.
Hmm.
Is I want to learn more about a world that I don't live in because I want to have the broadest perspective that I possibly can because I find that makes me a better human being. So lingo is so important in I don't even know how I want to word this appropriately, but I'll just do this. I was looking into something because I wanted to know, are there enough straight and gay relationships that are friendly, that have these conversations about, what are gay men and gay women's experiences? How are
Mhm,
they different from straight people's experiences? Because
mhm,
obviously the numbers are on the side of the straight people,
mhm,
but not enough of us learn the lingo and want to understand the challenges and the differences. So, do you find that there are enough gay straight relationships? Because in my life, there I just doesn't hadn't seemed to be so many opportunities to explore a different world.
mhm.
And I don't know if there's blockages, if there's and again, I'm not expecting you to answer this question for all of society, but in your observances, having lived, in a straight sense,
Mhm.
and now in your true sense, what is the big barrier there? Is there one? Am I
Yeah.
making it up?
Well, yeah, I think you're bringing up a lot of great points in that, first of all, this thing called life is complex, you know? And because I get asked all the time, I came out at 44. I'd been married for 19 years. I was married from 20 to 39, divorced, continued to date women, and came out 5 years later, right? So my sexuality had nothing to do with the ending of that marriage either. So now I'm stuck in this place where I don't mean now in this moment, but in since then, where the question comes up all the time. Well, if we're born this way, according to Lady Gaga, if we're if we're born this way, then I was gay the whole time. So then I get asked a lot about, was I denying it? How did I not see it? Why did it take till 44? And I'm like, I suppose I agree that we're born this way, but I don't care if that's true or not. It's just life's experience.
Mm,
I had absolutely no, I mean, looking back, again, retrospect and hindsight, I can imagine there were times where I questioned it, but it's so complex. I mean, honestly, I spent a lot of time looking at boys as a teenager and men as I got older, but I always felt like I was trying to figure out what made men tick because I didn't understand my father or my two older brothers. Like, they were so different than me in their interests and their behavior. I was trying to figure out what I was missing,
mm,
right? It just never occurred to me it was associated with anything sexual. In fact, the opposite made it more confusing, that all my best friends had always been women. They say marry your friend. Like, I did. But at the end of the day, we don't have sex with most of our friends,
yeah,
but it so, again, I mean, the world is also full of really bad advice. I think marry your friend is a dumb advice. Like, no, don't. Marry somebody you've got some passion for, that you develop friendship with. But
mm,
I dated my friends. I married a friend. We're really good friends today, all these years after divorce, because she was my friend, meant
mhm,
to be more of my friend, and co-creator of children, right? I mean, there's
absolutely.
different reasons you come together. We are the co-creator of three great people contributing great things to the world. Good for us. Like, if that was the whole function of our uh relationship, then awesome.
Mhm,
So it's so much more complex than these little black and white boxes that everybody wants to put the world in. But I will say that I also recognize the common denominator that I've had in much of my experiences in life is I've had the advantage of being on both sides of fences.
yeah,
So I grew up very lower middle class and ended up being the photographer of the richest people in the world. So I got to see both sides of the fence. When I came out at 44, so that's whatever, 2010 at this point, um, there weren't the same rights available to gay people. So
right,
I went from, middle-aged white straight man having all the American rights to recognizing that by my mere fact of loving a man now, he doesn't have the right to come into my hospital if I'm on my deathbed.
right,
Like, how bizarre is this? So I feel like a lot of what has helped me is living life on both sides of these fences. And here's where I think with the work that's, I think, called upon us to do is, and this is up to us. It's up to all of us to get rid of the damn assumptions that we carry around in this world. The assumptions that we make about people based on color, the assumptions of what we make about people based on how they're dressed and whether they can afford this luxury product. I mean, this world is so full of the most ridiculous assumptions
Mhm.
that if we could just get those dropped, and that, believe me, I heard all the assumptions and stereotypes about rich people growing up, lower middle class.
I bet.
The nannies raise the kids. They might look like they have everything. I mean, my favorite line with my mother was, "They look like they have a lot of money, but I hear they wait in lines at soup kitchens because they feed their family." I'm like, "Where are you hearing this stuff? Like, it's so ridiculous." And my mother made up more stories than anybody I've ever known, and most of the time it was funny because we'd be sitting at an ice cream shop and she's figured out everybody's life story. I'm like, "Oh my god." She just made stuff up and remarkably often was right. That was the scary part of it. I'm like, "Shit,
Like,
talk about good
"Oh."
instincts."
Yeah.
But, I mean, seriously, the job for us to do as individuals and as a society is to drop the damn assumptions. Like, you don't know anything about that person. Do not make assumptions of what you think you know about me because you now know me today as a gay man.
Mhm.
Like, but this
Instead of
is
just
an
Jeffrey, right?
oh my, and
Mhm.
parents, it is amazing to me. And again, your perspective changes when you've lived on two sides of fences. And something I see all the time, I could almost say it's a daily occurrence, is parents assuming the sexual preference of their children at even a very young age. I actually was brave enough once, and credit to this young couple with their maybe 2-year-old son one day. We were sitting in the park, and I just had a sense that I could say something to them and it was safe. And it turned out to be a beautiful conversation. But their 2-year-old son was running around with a t shirt that said lady killer on it. So I eventually brought the courage to say, "Do you think that's an assumption? Like, he's 2 years old.
Mhm.
He's not in touch with his sexuality. Like, do you realize that you're assuming that's who he's going to be? He's gonna be a lady killer."
Mhm.
And the mother really took that to heart. She's like, "Oh my god, it never occurred to me that we are imposing our views on our son." Like, they clearly loved their son. And I'll guarantee you they never put a shirt on like that again on
Yeah.
him because I spoke up and I said, let's not assume that anyone is going to identify a certain way. Let's not assume what anybody's sexual preferences. Let's not assume anyone's behavior because of the color of their skin. Let's not assume. I mean, it's the assumptions. I was contacted by a very high end brand recently, and had a conversation with them that may lead to an opportunity for me to be training some of their sales associates because their number one problem in this very high end brand is the sales associates
Mm.
making assumptions about whether people can afford the products or not and assuming just why it's important to them, even if they can. You just can't make assumptions. That necklace that a mom might be purchasing that the sales associate might think is a drop in the bucket for her because she's clearly, appears to be able to afford it. That sales associate may have no idea that that necklace is being purchased because it's a commemorative necklace for her teenage daughter that committed suicide.
Absolutely.
And I had a friend go through that exact
Mm.
experience and walked away so distraught. She will never go back to that luxury brand because the sales associate just didn't get that there could be something more important here at play than an apparent rich woman being able to buy a necklace at the drop of a hat. That necklace meant something, right? So we need to figure out every day for all of us, we need to figure out how to live our lives without making assumptions about people. And that will get us a long ways to healing.
Jeff, I think that's so perfect to say it that way because I you form certain beliefs about whatever, right? Government, politics,
Mhm.
Republicans, Democrats, independents, gay people, straight people, people of other colors. People tell you things, so you take these things with you. In the best way to get rid of those assumptions is to open your experience up,
Mhm.
right? Is to go have a conversation with someone that doesn't look like you, doesn't think
Yeah.
like you, votes a different way than you. Because at the end of the day, you realize everyone is a human and we're all complex and weird and have things that we carry with us from our past traumatic events, not traumatic events, joyous events. And that's what makes us all interesting, fun, and amazing. Now, not everybody's a good person, but in my experience, most people are pretty good at
Most people are
being that.
very good. Yep.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think having that understanding is the best part. And one of the things that I teach, Jeff, is how to get rid of those judgments. The judgments pop up, but they're not real. They're just 2 million-year-old defense mechanisms, survival techniques back when we were wandering around in the woods by ourselves, not sure how to live. We still have those things, but it's just understanding that they're there that
Mhm.
allows you to ask questions of people and accept their answers and go, huh, because I'll get all Americana on you for a second, because this is what I believe about America. The ultimate part is the individual freedom that we're all supposedly have. Now, obviously, you mentioned that's not always true, but the goal is for that to be true is that I have a belief system, and so long as I'm not harming you or anybody else, I get to live that way. And then I should accept that other people get to do the same thing, even if it's not completely 100% in agreement with me. Because I think where this technological age goes us, and this ties into what you do, Jeff, not only with the self-employed life and the Self-Employed Business Institute, SEBI, which you run, which
Mhm.
if you are a getting into self business, join Jeff's group. It is absolutely awesome. And then even Lingo, right? All of these things to me tie together to try to have us be good human beings, to respect each other, regardless of the other person's choices, which you can't control with, say, a law. And back to the technological age, it almost seems to me the trend is I'm right and everyone should live according to me and my rules. And I'm like, what? Who
Yeah.
wants to live in a world like that?
Yeah, it's and again, I think as much as there's a benefit to wisdom, gained wisdom as we get older, it also I'm finding it harder to exist sometimes because I'm that much more sensitive. And I something that really had a huge impact on me, which ended up being a huge dispute on Facebook and all this stuff, was when the billionaire marine explorers a couple years ago kind of took that submarine and to go to the Titanic, and then it imploded. And I couldn't believe the billionaire bashing that was going on. And I found it it's amazing to me how it was okay to most people because they're billionaires.
Hmm.
And then the conversation came up that you can't possibly be a billionaire without it being on the backs of other people. I'm
Mm.
like, I just don't agree with that. I mean, there are plenty of billionaires. Are you more at risk of being a jerk the more amount of money you have, and how are you at risk of your integrity being challenged because you can buy your way through anything and you can take advantage of people? Absolutely, you are more at risk. But I'll tell you what, I always like to say, if you're a jerk coming in, you're going to be a jerk going out. Like, it's not going to change your basic fundamental values if you're a good person, going into that situation. um, but this whole billionaire bashing really got under my skin because I felt like it's coming from people just sour grapes. Like, it just felt so inappropriate. And I don't like flat blanket truths. Like, it's not possible to be a billionaire without doing so on the backs of other people. It's like, it's not true. Taylor Swift just became a billionaire.
Mhm.
There's no evidence that she's done so on the backs of other people. In fact, all we have seen is tremendous of acts of generosity. Is it possible to be a billionaire not on the backs of other people? Absolutely. But I'm not going to make an assumption of anybody that they got to where they did because they did so on the backs of other people. And yet we should also be alert and on cue for when people are being taken advantage of, and we should rise up to help them. But again, it all comes down to, like, none of this is black and white. You can't say that is emphatically true because the opposite is also true.
Mhm.
And which is why it's a dangerous place to live when we're individuals. Now, I like what you're saying about individuality. And believe me, I've spent many years being involved in politics, both particularly on the state level in Connecticut, and then certainly being vocal on the national level. And I've always come back down to one thing, and I'm being a lot quieter this election cycle just by choice, because I've just really chosen to step into individuality.
Yeah.
Um, you know, every time I get so incredibly discouraged about where this country is headed, and I definitely have my concerns.
We all do, I think.
Yeah, I definitely have my concerns about where this is all headed. I feel like it's a growing pains. Um, the thing I come back to is it is aesthetically one of the most gorgeous places on the planet. Like, this is just a beautiful country, this thing we call America. Like, the diversity of the landscape, it's gorgeous. There's so much beauty to be seen here. I have faith in the individuals, even the individuals I don't understand, even the individuals that I don't agree with. I have faith in a good percentage, not all, but a very good percentage. At the end of the day, I've just decided to commit to what I can do as an individual and how I, as an individual, can help other individuals and hope that that means something in the world because the bigger game is too difficult. My son was very I've learned this from him. He was in a position at a very high level in national politics to and was has been given various opportunities along the way that he has chosen to not take
Mm,
because he thinks the system is just too broken to have as much impact as that there's a lot to be fixed on the national level. There just is.
yeah.
And we need to watch it, but there's a lot broken at the national level where he has chosen to he's the executive director of a political action committee that does real boots on the ground work, raising the wages for home health care workers, protecting the rights of certain groups of workers. Like, that's where his organization is making real difference, and it's he can count the impact. He can trace the impact. And that's where he finds the greatest satisfaction. And I've learned a lot from observing him to just stay in a space where I can have the maximum impact. And he has had some incredible offers at the national level. And he's like,
Mhm.
nope, I'd rather be where the boots are on ground and where I can make a difference. And I've learned a lot with that, and I try to run my life and my business and my contributions to this place we call America. I try to keep them more on an individual basis and see what we can do.
Yeah, well, and I think that that's the solution ultimately
I do
is
too.
an individual awakening awareness one by one because that's how you break this broken cycle. And
Yep.
Jeffrey, you're so right because that's one of the reasons I didn't want to do talk radio anymore is because it both sides are doing this.
Yeah, it's
Number one,
broken.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's
Our
not fun
national
to talk
system is
about,
very
but
broken. Yeah, the
exactly.
national system is very broken. When people are getting elected by um, craziness. I mean, that's
Crazier the
become a
better.
genuine it's become a genuine strategy. And it's both sides. I'm not putting blame on any one side or the other. It's
Absolutely.
just become this, you know, it's almost like politics has become too much about marketing. And this is coming from a marketing guy. But it's like, I want to go back to the fundamentals. Like, tell me what you believe. Tell me we're going to lead this country. But we've drifted so far from that. It's a media circus.
It is.
Um, and I'm not gonna blame the media for it either because the media thrives on what people respond to.
The audience. Yeah.
It's a big system. The
Mhm.
national structure of our country is a big system, and I do think it's very broken. Um, and I will continue to believe in the actions of the individuals to see where this all goes, and see, what we can fix. It won't be quick.
Interestingly,
It
it
won't be quick,
comes no, it won't be quick, but it
no.
does come down to what your dad told you all those years ago.
In a way, yeah.
It's
Yeah, he
kind of
wasn't wrong.
no, he
Like I
wasn't.
said, I may have thought he was a jerk at the time he said it, but he wasn't wrong. Like I said, hindsight's it's great. I have a lot more respect for the man than I may have during his life, and he was my dad. I have respect for him. Just in that moment, in that time, um, for all the reasons you're talking about. I mean, it's again, there's a million theories. I've had enough therapy and coaching in my life. I mean, could my father have recognized in me that I was gay? I was a different son, right? Was that pushing buttons for him? Was he gay? And he had suppressed that for himself. And that's a theory that's been brought up by two very different therapists. Like, I'm like, there could be that too. I don't see it. He was about as straight as a man can be, but you never know. Um, like I said, just I think we have to let go of assumptions, and I find myself saying all the time to people that none of this is black and white. This whole thing of life is so much more complex than we give ourselves credit for. We're almost all holding multiple emotions that are contradicting each other at the same time. Even as individuals, we're often holding various things that seem to be in contradiction with one another at the same time. And
Mhm.
that's okay. It's
That's
complex.
it's just life, right?
It's just life.
So before we get out of here, tell me something, Jeffrey Shaw, that in business you struggled with, had difficulty solving a problem, and how did you eventually break through that? Because I think that's what everyone who wants to have the self-employed life,
Mhm.
again, book number 2, Jeffrey Shaw. If you wanna have that life, you're gonna have that struggle that you go through.
Yeah.
So is there one that comes to mind for you?
Well, I think I have to give you 2. Um, because one was so long ago, one was more recent. So what was pivotal for me as a photographer and how I ended up being a photographer for affluent families is that I my first 3 years as a photographer is I returned to my hometown and struggled and struggled and struggled and ended up having to I just wanted to do family portraits, but I ended up having to do high school senior portraits. I did weddings for a little bit.
Mm,
I was photographing dance contests. Like I really watered down my core values for what I was trying to do in order to survive financially. And mind you, I was married at 20, so I was already married with an apartment and all the responsibilities that come from that. So my first 3 years were a struggle, and it was a single conversation with someone I'd hoped would become a client, um, that yeah, I did my usual pitch, and she sent it up to me said to me, "Well, that sounds great and all, but I don't have the luxury of worrying about my children's memories. I don't know how I'm paying my rent this month." And what stood out to me and what I encourage everybody to think about is I knew in that moment I had a huge choice. I could continue as I had done to change everything about myself to match the market. Like I had watered down my core values and I had watered down what I intended to be and who I intended to be as a photographer in order to match the market. I could continue to do that. Or I could say, which is what I believe today, is that I fundamentally believe there's an audience out there waiting for me to show up.
mm,
I have to find myself and then find them. And that has always been my process. I needed to find myself, and I found in myself a photographer that not only was good at what I did, but that I was willing to understand the clients that I wanted to serve. I understood who I was meant to serve. So I did that inner work and then I found them. And they I found them, they found me, and I rode that wave for decades. So that's one key lesson that we are, I think, constantly faced. And I would encourage anybody, don't change who you are to fit the market. Get get clear on who you are and find the people that are waiting for you to show up. They're there. Believe that. Do the inner work, then do the work to find them. Do the work to wave your flag so they can recognize you. The second was much more recent in that when I started speaking in 2009, I had gone to coach training. I decided to become a speaker. And when I was beginning the transition of doing less photography so that I could build a coaching practice, everyone told me that I should be a speaker in the luxury market. I should teach people what I know about that market. And I shut it down. I told everybody I don't want to go to my grave just talking about all things rich people. Like I wanted to believe there was more integrity between that. And that's 2009. 10, 11 years it took before I realized that is exactly what I should be talking about because I'm not just teaching the lessons. I'm also standing up for my core values that they as a group of affluent buyers, luxury buyers are not deserving of assumptions any more than anybody else is deserving of assumptions because of their sexuality or the color of their skin.
mm.
Right. So I don't know that I would have been able to do that 12 years ago. So I'm glad I waited. But at this higher level of maturity, which is why I get the response I do from audiences that are saying that was more than a sales conversation. When they hear me speak, like I got more out of that than sales. And that's very intentional. I want to teach them what they came for and I want to change the world. I want to change the world to just to let down their assumptions, their guards, and recognize that if you're going to bash luxury buyers or the luxury brands, then you're just doing the exact same thing that you don't want done to you. So I'm glad I waited, but I think the big lesson in that is, I always joke for this very same reason I came out when I was 44. I guess I'm just a really slow learner. And I'm
Many of
trying to
us are.
and I'm trying to encourage everybody else not to take so long. So it took me 44 years to figure out I was gay. It took me, 12 years to figure out that, oh, I should be talking about luxury market. Right. So I guess I'm just a slow learner, but I'm glad I took the time that I did because I think I've said about myself in all my business that I'm never the first one out of the gate, but I'm almost always the last one standing. Right. So I know that in myself, like I may take a little bit longer to get out of the gate, but I am persistent as hell. I will keep at it. I will get more and more clear, deliver more and more value, and I'll be the last one standing.
That's
Um,
it. It's
so
You gotta
I'm
keep
okay
going,
with that.
right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that we have themes today. Number 1, you just said it, keep going, right?
Hmm.
Even if you're late to the party, doesn't matter, keep going, be the last one standing. Number 2, what dad said, no one's gonna care about your life more than you. And then
Hmm.
number 3, I think, Jeffrey, to get rid of many of your old assumptions,
Hmm.
you gotta come out of your proverbial closet because you
Yep.
really that's where you figure out who you truly are,
Yep.
right?
100%.
It's not just straight gay. It's no, your closet is the things about yourself that you don't want to confront, you don't want to talk about, you don't want to think about. That is the best work that any single human can do is to figure yourself out because then you naturally let go of your assumptions of other people because you're okay with who they are.
Yeah. Exactly. Just be open because it's one big weird thing called life.
And you only get to do it once as far as we know, so you might as well enjoy it.
And we can't make any assumptions about that either. Like, I don't know, maybe.
Exactly. Maybe
I
we do
mean,
it 20,000 times. I don't
I
know.
have no idea.
Jeffrey Shaw, thank you so much. He is a business coach, he is a mentor, he is an author, he is a speaker, and he's an all around awesome dude as you get to experience today. So we should do this again sometime.
You never know. I'm sure it will be different. That's the great thing.
Exactly
Catch
right.
up in a few months, life will be different.
No doubt. Jeff, thank you so much.
Thanks, Rob.